Hey everyone, Dr. Alex Ritza here, the Cycling Doc. Today's video, we're going to be going over a hip routine together that you can add to your regular routine or your already existing regular mobility routine to keep your hips healthy, to make sure that you stay injury-free on the bike, and maybe with this one in particular, a little more injury-free off the bike so that that unidirectional movement of the hips, really limited in extension, side-to-side movement, abduction, adduction, and rotation. Make sure that doesn't limit you off the bike. So let's get into it. So this video, like many others, geared towards help keeping you injury-free on and off the bike. If you want more health tips, if you want more exercises, if you want more things that are gonna make you stronger, faster, and more healthy on and off the bike, please hit that subscribe and like button. So I'm gonna walk you guys through this mobility routine and give you some tips, tricks, instructions, modifications if you're finding it difficult. I will say that this mobility routine is pretty challenging. It is a little bit more advanced, but we can modify some of the positions to make it a little bit easier. We're gonna call it aspirational. So, with this video, you're gonna need, or with this exercise routine, you're gonna need a soft mat. In the first position, we're gonna get down into a 90-90 position with the knees and hips at 90 degrees. And we're gonna make sure that we start moving the hips side to side. And with that side-to-side movement, that abduction and adduction of the hips, that's gonna start to help open things up. If you need to put your hand onto the wall to give yourself a little bit of support, that's okay. We're also gonna work in a clockwise, counterclockwise, circular position, adding a little bit of rotation before we get down onto the ground. Now with this position, we're still in that 90-90 position, but we've leaned over. We've got one hand supporting that foot and the other one on the ground. And this one, I'm trying to move side to side to open up those hips a little bit. This will combine some internal rotation, external rotation, as well as side to side abduction, adduction. And then after a few maneuvers back and forth, we're gonna start scouring or doing some circles, and you can do clockwise and counterclockwise. And with these rotations, if you find a spot that seems a little bit stuck, you might want to focus on it a bit before we get down into our next position. Now, the next position can be tough for some people to get into. You might have trouble getting the forearms down. That's okay. You can put a pillow, a block if you got a yoga block, anything that's going to let you get down a little bit further. And we're going to do the exact same thing in this position. Side to side movement. And with that side to side movement, again, we're going to be looking for any points of restriction and working through them, spending a little bit more time at those points of restriction. You can do that by continuing side to side or do the circles that you can see right now. And with those circles, it's the same thing. We're trying to go clockwise, counterclockwise, and go as big as we can. Before we move on to this next position, with this next position, you're reaching with your left hand as far as you can to the left, taking big, big breaths in, which will let you deepen that position through the left hip. After you've done that, you're gonna plant your right hand and we're gonna reach up to the ceiling and we're gonna take a big breath in, reach a little bit farther, big breath in, reach a little bit farther, 3 to 5 times until you feel like you've gained 5-10 degrees more range of motion. In this next position, we're backed with our hand on the foot and we're working through the hamstrings and the sciatic nerve, bending backwards, trying to straighten the leg as much as possible, which will help improve the movement through the sciatic nerve and through the hamstrings. This, again, some people might find challenging. Spend a bit more time if you feel stuck before you move on to stretching the hip flexors on the right. The tapping of my chest and the tapping of the buttock, that just meant to show you that you should tighten up the abdominals, tighten up the same side or the right glute, so that will really, really emphasize that stretch through the hip flexor. In this position, you can see I've deepened it by bringing that right arm sideways and across, and I'm just doing minor little pumps through that hip flexor. You can also hold it and squeeze that right buttock, but I like to do a small little pump. It's safe for the spine as long as you're holding the core nice and tight. and this is something that a lot of cyclists are gonna find tight. You'll see in this position, I did a little bit of back and forward. I just found something catching in that spot before we move on. And we're gonna start working towards doing the opposite side leg, but we're gonna get down into this sumo squat where we're moving side to side. I start on my toes and I'm gonna slowly work towards my heels. Some people won't be able to get down onto the heels. That's okay. Spend some time on the toes, back and forth, side to side. And then in this position, you'll see I'm using my elbows pushing outward, and that outward push should open up the hips a little bit more. If you're having trouble, you can put something under your buttock to support you. This next position, we're doing some internal and external rotation of the hip joint, really pushing that foot and those toes down towards the mat. And we're really working towards bringing that thigh in so that we move towards a lunge position, and you'll feel this really deep through the front of that hip flexor. If you're having trouble getting to this position, you can slowly work towards it with the ultimate goal you can see here of getting that thigh as close to the ground as possible, squeezing the right buttock, and really thrusting into the ground as much as you can. You're gonna see I'm gonna transition off of my left foot down towards the knee, and that's gonna really, really improve our hip extension. If you feel any pinching in the front, this is where you should go back and get into that lunge position to open things up some more. Now, you're gonna see that we're gonna transition. I'm gonna do the same thing over again. I'm gonna point out a couple of different things on this go around. So with this position, we are again moving side to side, keeping the core relatively tight, and you really want to focus on pushing the hip or the pelvis side to side like you're Elvis Presley, and you'll feel it through the glutes on the side of the hip. With this position that we go down next to with the hands supporting, you can see I'm not quite in that 90-90, my knee's a little bit farther back, that's okay. You can modify it as much as you like with some limits, but with the modification, the goal is to just feel as deep of a stretch as you can, not feeling anything that's too intense, nothing over a 5 or 6 out of 10 that you feel like might aggravate or injure you. So I hang out a little bit longer in this position on this side before I get down onto my hands. And again, we're doing the same thing. We're going side to side. Oh, there you can see I went back because I forgot to do that circumduction or that rotation. So I'm glad that I went, and I'm gonna show you guys that. So we're rotating through, and in my mind, what I'm picturing is I'm picturing a clock, and I'm trying to draw the outer edge of the clock with my pelvis in a clockwise and counterclockwise position, and I'm trying to make the clock bigger every single time I do it. So again, in this position, you're down on the forearms. If you're limited by your spine, put some sort of block or some sort of mat as we go from side to side, and then start those rotations. Again, picturing the clock might help. We were gonna reach away from the high knee. Big breaths in are meant to help deepen that stretch, and with those big breaths, every time you release, you should let it go as much as you can, and you'll find you'll be able to reach a little bit farther. And it's the same thing with the next position here where we're up overhead. Every release of that deep breath, you'll notice the hips open up a bit more, the spine opens up a bit more, and you can go farther. With the routine as a whole, and with any mobility routine, breathing nice and easy is super important, because if you're holding your breath, nervous system and spine and muscles are gonna be a little bit more tense, and you're not gonna get the same efficacy, the same release as if you are holding your breath versus nice and relaxed, letting the breath out. So we've gone through some of that hamstring mobility. We're back into this lunge position. Now I notice in the office, this is where people have a lot of trouble isolating sometimes. And so if you squeeze the same size left buttock, if you squeeze the core, if you try to push the pelvis forward like you're pushing the belt buckle forward, or you feel like you're thrusting like you're having sex, that is where you'll really isolate those hip flexors. And in this position where I'm reaching over to the right, the pelvis will scooch a little bit to the left, and that will get through the TFL and some of the hip flexor muscles as well. You'll notice we're back into that sumo position for just a little bit. We've already done some work, so we don't need to spend too much time, but we're again working on that internal and external rotation of the hip, slowly trying to move or loosen things up so that we can move into that really, really deep lunge position. This will be really helpful if you notice a lot of tightness through the groin, and if you get medial or inner knee pain on the bike, it should help to loosen up some of those nerves and muscles traveling on the inner side of the thigh. With this, it's really similar to the lunge we already talked about, where if you squeeze the core and squeeze the glute on that left or down side, you'll feel more of a stretch through the front of the hip. Again, we've moved from foot supporting us to that right knee being down on the floor, and I'm really thrusting into the ground here to try and make it as deep as possible. This, once you get down there, feels excellent. If you need a little bit of support, you can get some. This last position that we're gonna go into is something you'll need a chair or a couch for. It is a standing pigeon pose. Now you can do this on the ground if you can get into the pigeon. Because of the shape of my hip bones, like many others, I can't. With this, do not do this if it bothers your knee. But the goal here is either to squat down or hinge forward like you just see now, trying to get that knee closer and closer down, parallel to the ground or parallel to the chair. And you're gonna feel a really, really deep pull through the piriformis and the glutes in the buttock. Again, be careful with this one, but if you can get it, it feels fantastic. You can also try pushing with that foot down into the chair, and that will help you deepen that stretch. So guys, that is my hip mobility routine. It gets all the directions of the hip range of motion, and in general, if you use all of that hip range of motion, there's no reason why you should ever lose it. If you do this every day of your life, there's no reason why at 80, 90, 100, you still won't be able to do it. The thing with cycling is because of that unidirectional range of motion, because the hips never move in anything but really flexion and a little bit of extension, you can lose that hip range of motion as you age because that hip range of motion is never used. And if you don't use it, the body will cease its ability to use it because the body is very smart. It adapts to what you throw at it. And if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help. If you have any other requests for videos, leave them below. I'll be happy to help. Cycling Doc out. You guys enjoy the routine. Take care.